Today we're going to talk about something kind of weird at the heart of the UK's government. It's this idea of the accidental conscience, how the unelected House of Lords of all places ended up becoming the nation's ethical sounding board.
So let's just start with a really big question, right? Where does a nation's conscience actually live? I mean, in any government, who's the one that has to deal with those really tough, messy, ethical questions? You know, the ones where a law might be super popular, but it's also morally tricky?
Okay, let's get into it. An accidental conscience. How one part of government inherited a job it was never, ever designed for. And that's the key here, isn't it? The House of Lords got this job by default, not by design. It's like this accidental, sometimes pretty awkward, inheritance.
And to really get why, you've got to look at this tale of two houses. On one side, you've got the House of Commons. They're always fighting an election, right? They're laser-focused on short-term pressure. But then you've got the House of Lords. These are folks with decades of experience, and crucially, they have way fewer immediate incentives. They're not worried about getting re-elected next Tuesday.
And this is the absolute crucial point. The House of Lords was never, ever meant to be some kind of ethical watchdog. Its modern job sort of evolved into being a legislative brake. You know, a place to slow things down, stress test the details, and find all the little technical flaws in laws that get sent up from the Commons. It was designed as a brake, not as a conscience.
Right. The pull of ethical gravity. Why these difficult questions naturally drift upwards. So, if it wasn't designed for this, how on earth did it end up with the job? Well, this brings us to a really cool concept we're going to call ethical gravity.
So what is ethical gravity? Well, think of it as this invisible force that pulls on these really difficult moral questions. When an issue is just too messy, it doesn't fit neatly into party politics or a catchy election slogan, it tends to drift away from all that political heat in the Commons and float upwards towards the place that has more time and way less political pressure. And that place is the Lord.
And look, this isn't just some theory. We see it in action all the time. Think about the biggest, most complicated debates we have as a country. We're talking end-of-life care, asylum policy, government surveillance powers, bioethics, policing, welfare design, even tough climate trade-offs. Again and again and again, where do the deepest, most profound discussions on these things happen? Yep, in the House of Lords.
Okay, 4 cracks in the system. These are the problems created by an accidental conscience. But here's the catch, right? Relying on an accidental conscience, well, it creates some really big systemic problems. Let's break down the 4 biggest cracks that have shown up in the system because of this whole setup.
So here are the 4 systemic problems, and they're all connected. First up, ethics becomes personal. It's all about people, not the ideas. Second, you have this paradox of having moral weight, but with absolutely no mandate. Third, moral objections get all mixed up with just simple procedural delays. And finally, these super important debates, they happen in these intense bursts, and then they're just gone.
Yeah, this quote just nails the first problem perfectly. The argument depends on who is speaking rather than how their reasoning is organized. Think about that, because there's no formal official process for these ethical debates. Everything hinges on who is saying it. Is it a bishop, a former top judge, a Nobel-winning scientist? The authority is all tied up in the person, not in the process.
And what's the result of that? Well, instead of actually debating the substance of the ethical problem, the conversation just spirals. It turns into a fight about legitimacy. Does this person even have the right to be here? Or who are they to raise this issue? It's a huge, huge distraction from what really matters.
And that leads us straight into the second problem, the Lord's dilemma. It's a political catch-22. We kind of expect them to raise these difficult moral points, but at the same time, we've stripped them of any real democratic power. So what happens? If they speak too carefully, they just get ignored. But if they speak forcefully, they're immediately accused of overreach and undemocratic meddling. It is a complete no-win situation.
Okay, so the third problem is a really practical one, and it all boils down to this question. When the Lords holds up a new law, is it because of a technical flaw, like a typo, or is it because of a really troubling moral objection?
The thing is, the system itself doesn't know the difference. There's no special button they can press for major ethical concern. Procedurally, pausing a bill to fix some legal wording looks exactly the same as pausing it to consider a really serious potential harm. And this makes it incredibly easy for critics to just wave it all away and say, oh, that's just the Lords holding things up again.
And this timeline, wow, it just illustrates the fourth and final problem so perfectly. This is the life cycle of an ethical debate in the current system. A bill arrives, there's this super intense, passionate debate for a little while, and then the moment passes. the topic just vanishes. There's no institutional memory, no lessons learned file, so the next time a similar issue comes up, they have to rebuild the entire argument from absolute scratch.
So, a systemic mismatch. This isn't a failure of people, it's a failure of design. So what do all these cracks add up to? Well, a fundamental mismatch. The problem isn't the people and the lords, not at all. It's the system that they're all forced to work within.
I mean, just look at this list. Look at all the different jobs we're asking this one single institution to do. Review legislation, sure. Spot technical flaws, okay. Act as a brake, fine. Provide long-term caution, makes sense. And, oh yeah, also quietly serve as the entire nation's moral sounding board. Some of these roles pull in completely opposite directions.
So, when those tensions inevitably boil over, what do? Our first instinct is to blame the people involved. We point fingers at the bishops, the judges, the peers. We argue about whether they're being too political, but we are totally missing the real story here. The system itself has never, ever created a proper, dedicated home for these absolutely crucial ethical conversations.
So, what comes next? We need to move from an accidental process to a deliberate one. So where does that leave us? Well, the final part of this is about looking forward. It's about how we might finally move away from this accidental, improvised mess to something far more deliberate and intentional. And listen, the goal here isn't about being louder or more moralistic. It's not about more finger-wagging. It's actually just about being clearer. It's about creating a dedicated space where these conversations can happen in a way that's structured and, transparent. So what would a deliberate system for ethics actually look like? Well, for starters, it would be expected, not improvised as a surprise. It would be structured, not just episodic and then forgotten. And maybe most importantly, it would be open, not smuggled into technical debates through the back door.
And that's really the question we want to leave you with. What would dealing with ethics deliberately look like? If we could design a system from scratch, one that truly takes our national ethics seriously, what would that actually be? That's the conversation we really need to start having. Thanks so much for joining me.